All right, welcome everybody. So, for those who don't know, we have been compiling a curriculum for conversion, and this week we're going to talk about Midrashim, which I teach people. Anytime you hear the word Midrash or plural is Midrashim, you should think in your mind folklore and legend. Now, there are going to be some people who will be offended by that because they take this stuff as very literal. It's been memorized and passed down from every generation, word for word. We've never deviated for thousands of years. So there are some people who believe that. And then there are also other people who just dismiss it completely. And you don't want to take that extreme approach. However, Rambam's position is what we go by here, that if you dismiss them all as having no value, then you're considered a fool. But you're also a fool if you blindly follow and believe every midrash you've ever heard. Just because some rabbi tells you that doesn't mean you have to blindly follow it. And there's a level of subjectivity to it because we don't have a list of, well, these you take literally and these you just accept as the speaker trying to convey a message. So there's a moral, ethical lesson in here. It's not meant to be literal, and some contradict each other. So what do you do? Well, if you're going to believe them all, do you believe this one and this one that says the exact opposite? But we don't have a list, so one that you take seriously might not be the same one as someone else takes seriously. You might dismiss one that they don't. They might dismiss one that you don't. So there's a level of subjectivity to it. So that's what we're going to go over today. And I know most of you guys are quite familiar with it, but for anyone watching the video that might not have heard of this topic, that's pretty much how we look at this stuff. So let's go to screen share and I'll show you the documents that we have created on this. There's three of them. So the first one is Understanding Midrashim. Would anybody like to read? Minimize.
Okay.
All right, let's do it. Let's try and
Uh,
keep it PG rated for the audience.
Understanding Midrashim, folklore and legend. In this section, we will begin to understand what Midrash is, its significance in the Jewish tradition, and how it functions in order to deepen our understanding of the Torah and Jewish life. To explore the different categories of Midrash and its historical development, to learn how Midrashim are used to explain biblical texts and provide ethical and moral guidance. The introduction to the Midrash. The word Midrash comes from the Hebrew root drash, meaning to seek or to inquire. Midrash refers to the vast body of interpretive literature that seeks to explain, expand upon, and sometimes challenge the plain meaning of the Torah and other sacred texts. Midrashim provides layers of meaning that offer moral teachings, stories of the lives of the patriarchs and matriarchs, and spiritual insights. Unlike the more legalistic and structured interpretation of the Talmud, Midrash often uses narrative metaphor and allegory to explore the deeper hidden meanings of the text.
Okay, so there's two different types here, which we're going to go over. Midrash Halacha and Midrash Agadah. Agadah comes from like the telling. Like on Pesach, we have the Haggadah. You add a hey there, and it's like the story, the telling of. So we're going to go over some examples, and I wanted to put them in here, but I don't even have a kindergarten level education on how to use things like Microsoft Word and whatnot. So I wasn't able to put it in here. The text was different. See how some of it's in bold when they're using the Hebrew stuff and the rest is not. And it didn't look right. So I just put it on the third document that we're going to go over. So there's going to be examples of each of these, but these two are just the summary of what they are for now. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, you may be asking yourself, what is Midrash? Well, Midrashim are a form of uh, what exegesis?
Exegesis.
Yes, Midrashim are a form of exegesis or biblical interpretation. There are two primary types of Midrash. One Midrash halacha. This type of midrash focuses on the legal aspects of the Torah. It seeks to derive laws and principles from the text, often expanding on interpreting the commandments in ways that apply to everyday Jewish life. The Mishnah and Tosefta are often sources for midrash halacha.
Okay, the Mishnah, that's the first part of the Talmud. This is the Tanaim, the generation that had smicha. That's what gave them the authority to judge, going all the way back to Moses. The Tosefta is a supplement to the Mishnah. It's Mishnaic era literature. It's the same generation with the same people that had the smicha before that was lost. So this is what makes it authoritative. Is these are the people that had the authority to judge, not later commentators on them like the Gemara. So that's why
Rabbi,
this is connected to halacha, the law. Yeah.
would you say that Tosefta is like a commentary, or are there actual laws in there?
So it's a good question. So there is a debate because the Mishnah is what's accepted as the authoritative part. Uh, there's people that say the Gemara is just as authoritative because they elevate the Gemara to that level, but the Gemara is a later generation. It's the Amoraim, they don't have the Smicha. So legally, the Mishnah is more authoritative. So if you want to go against something in the Mishnah, you have to go with something like the Tosefta because this is the same generation. It's not the later generation. Are there laws in here? Um, Sort of, yeah, because remember the Mishnah is not always clear. The Mishnah gives you sometimes it is clear. It says this rabbi says this rabbi says that, but the Chachamim, the wise men, the sages, or the halakha was decided this, and then it's clear, it's final. The Gemara may debate different aspects of it, but the law itself is final. Other times in the Mishnah, it's not clear. We don't have the final law. So that's part of why we have a Gemara is to explain something where the Mishnah is not clear. So the Tosefta is usually called a supplement to the Mishnah. So one argument for this is um, if we're going to get the law from the Tosefta, why didn't they put it in the Mishnah? So one argument is, well, the Mishnah can't include everything. So it would be like if I tried to write down all the laws today in America. I'm going to assume you know certain things. I can't just write a million-page document. So the Tosefta kind of helps you understand some of the that didn't make it in, but there are contradictions. So I think this is why Chaim Ovadia calls the Tosefta like the counter Mishnah or the underground Mishnah, because there are things in there that I think you could take as law. But again, we don't have one final version to say, well, we posket off of this and this was decided. So things are not always clear, and that's kind of why we didn't stop here and we went on with Gemaras. So I don't know, do you have a specific example that you're asking about or just in general?
No, just in general. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, you could go by just the Mishnah. However, there is a lot of good information in the Tosefta, but it's less popular. And if it comes one versus the other, the Mishnah is accepted as the authoritative one, although you also can't just follow that blindly either, as we see in the Gemara. So, real quick on this, in general, like the surface level understanding, people just say, well, the Talmud, and they don't dive much deeper into that. Like I just explained, the Mishnah is going to be more authoritative than the Gemara. So when somebody tells you something's in the Talmud, your first question should be where? Are you talking about the Mishnah itself or are you talking about the Gemara? Because if it's the Gemara, then okay, well, somebody has an opinion on something in the Mishnah. I want to see what the Mishnah says itself. Because the Gemara, you're going to have different opinions on that Mishnah. So what does the Mishnah actually say? Because when you find it in the Mishnah, sometimes, depending on the topic, there's different opinions in the Mishnah on it. So it's not final. So your first level is if it's in the Talmud, okay. Then when you want to dig a little deeper, you want to know, is it in the Mishnah or the Gemara? If you just stop there, then your conclusion is if it comes from the Mishnah, I need to pay more attention to it than if it comes from the Gemara. Now, and let's go a little bit deeper. So when somebody tells you, okay, it's in the Gemara, based on what I just explained, you
Oh,
would
I love it when they say, "Oh, it's in the Talmud," and then it winds up being in the Gemara.
right. So the first level of digging deeper is when it's in the Talmud, is it the Mishnah or the Gemara? You're already going to be somewhat dismissive, or not necessarily dismissive, but you're not going to elevate it to the level of the Mishnah if they say it's in the Gemara. But the next level is okay, it's in the Gemara, but is it quoting the Baraitot? Does the Gemara say, okay, the Baraitot teach? Because if they're saying that, what are the Baraitot? The Baraitot is the Tosefta, the Sifri, the Sifra, the Mechilta. This is all Mishnaic era literature. So is the Gemara saying that one of the Amoraim, the generation of the Gemara, is giving you this opinion? This Amoraim says this, or is the Gemara saying one of the Baraitot? Is the Gemara saying that the Tosefta quotes this? Because if the Gemara is saying the Tosefta quotes this, then they're not quoting the Mishnah, but they're quoting the same people from the Mishnah who likely could be rabbis with smicha, tanaim. Even though it was left out of the Mishnah, it wasn't included. Does that mean it doesn't have the same weight? It could be that it was
Well,
left
that,
out
or
of
you
the
can
Mishnah.
just call the facility that wants the records and have them call us.
What number do I call to get the facility?
No, they need to send over a fax request on their letterhead. So yeah, they can get records without your signature as long as there's nothing sensitive being asked for.
Well,
Yehuda
I don't think
Hanasi
that there's
didn't have one,
anything that's sensitive in the Tosefta.
and Yehuda Hanasi didn't have
Yeah.
a fax
Yeah,
machine.
they can call and get the records because they know who is it.
It's it's funny because I mean
Yeah.
she doesn't know she's off mute, but
Yeah, they can call and request it. Just let them know that they need to fax something over on their letterhead.
it's
Mute.
it's on the topic that we're discussing, so it kind of fits the conversation.
It is on the
No.
letterhead.
Yeah, no. No.
We
The
need
Mishnah is the ultimate letterhead.
we need the smicha stamped on the top with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's signature on the bottom.
Okay. All right.
All right, just fax that over, and
She was like, "Okay, all right."
we'll determine if it's
Yeah.
halakha or minhagim.
No, you're fine. You have a good holiday.
All right, you too. Hag sameach.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, we'll talk to you later. Oh, you couldn't have written better if it was scripted. Okay, so are there laws in the Tosefta? You could poskin off of it, and this would be better than some modern day minhag say, oh well, but it's popular today, and this is what we do, and we base this on the Gemara. So I would elevate it above the Gemara if the Gemara is not quoting Baraitot, Mishnah Tosefta era literature. But again, so many people today they elevate minhagim to the level of halacha, and they don't even know where it comes from. They're quoting things that are post Gemara, and they can't pin back to where it comes from. So this is why we were talking before the recording. If you want to go by Mishnah Torah, best way to go. And then because he didn't give you the sources, so something you find in Mishnah Torah could come from the Gemara. If you go through the Mishnah next or the Tosefta, then you'll know, okay, this confirms this is where Rambam got it from. So you can lob off all the stuff that could have came from the Gemara. You know it comes from the Mishnah or the Tosefta. Then you can, there you go. Not only does it come from Mishnah Torah, but we know it comes from one of these two places. Like I've told you guys before about these Frankenstein opinions that people make. So when you go through the Mishnah, and I don't remember, Ash, since you're going through it now, and it's in the beginning, maybe you can find it. It's in Demai, like the laws of untithed seeds. It's either in the Mishnah or the Tosefta that accompanies that one in Demai. There's three opinions there. The first opinion is that if somebody leaves the religion, then that's it. They're dead to us. They're gone. This is why we used to sit Shiva for people when they leave the religion. And it's applied consistently. Doesn't matter if you're a native born or a convert. You leave, that's it. There's no coming back. That's his opinion. Then the second opinion comes in and says, well, if they want to come back publicly, then we'll take them back. But if they want to come back privately, then we do not take them back. Again, the second opinion is consistent across the board. If you're a native born or a convert and you come back publicly, you make a declaration that you're going to observe and you're going to be frum, then we'll take you back, either one, native born or convert. If you
So
sneak
Rabbi,
in
question.
and I could just come and go privately, I don't want to make the declaration, we don't accept you back. And then the third opinion, it says the sages say, which means the halakha was decided, that in all cases, we always take them back, whether they come back publicly or privately, both the native born and the convert. So there it was decided. This applies evenly to everybody. We'll always take you back. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you say that, are you talking about someone who's done avodah zara, or are you just talking in general, like a Baal Sheshuva
Either one.
that didn't go
Yeah,
that
either
way?
one. Either one.
Wow. Wow.
You had back then, I mean, to be clear, it doesn't say someone who was doing avodah zarah. So to come back, you would not be actively doing that. So what it's referencing is there's what's called Am Haaretz, people of the land. This is like another word for ignoramus. They're Jewish, they were born here, but they don't know anything and they don't keep anything. And then there's a chaver. Chaver is someone who's a religious associate, someone who keeps the laws. So if an Am Haaretz, someone who doesn't know anything, which could be a Baal Teshuvah, or a Tanok Shenishba, or an apostate who left and wants to come back, in this example that you're bringing up, they would have to, almost like a convert, they would have to make a declaration in front of three Haverim, not necessarily a court, but in front of three Havers. That okay, I'm going to keep the law now, and oftentimes the Am Haaretz doesn't know anything.
Is a Harriet is that what they are?
Yeah, they're just ordinary people.
But
But if
they keep the law.
right, that's why they're a chaver, because they're observant. Maybe not perfectly, but they're religiously.
So a haver is another word for a cheditot.
Or he could be educated, but he's observant. So
Right.
he's religious. So in this case, an Am Haaretz who doesn't know anything, it says you specifically teach them things in order. The first thing you teach them is washing hands. If they're going to keep that and you see them washing their hands, then you go on and teach them the next thing, which I think was kashrut, how to keep kosher. Or maybe it was saying barachot. I don't remember the order. But you just keep on teaching them. So just like when you see in the laws of conversion, an Am Haaretz coming to a Chaver and say, I'm going to be observant, same thing as a convert coming. You're going to accept them once they make their declaration, and then you're going to teach them. So the first thing you teach them is washing your hands. If they don't wash their hands, if they reject that, then you don't take them seriously. If you can't even keep this, then what else should we teach you? You're not serious. If you teach them washing your hands and you see them doing that, then you teach them the second thing and the third thing, and it gives you the specific examples. Then you continue teaching them. If you see, and this is where it gets interesting, if you see that they're learning and they're doing what you're teaching them, and then you see one thing they're not doing, you don't assume that they're not serious and stop teaching them. You just don't trust them with things like if they're not keeping kosher, you don't trust them with kashrut, but you still assume that they're learning. I'm paraphrasing, but that's in there. So that's what it's referring to. The first opinion, if someone leaves, they're not a chaver anymore. They are not one of us. They're gone forever. There's no coming back. The second opinion is if you make this declaration, that's what it means when it says when you're going to come back publicly, we'll accept you. If you're just going to go off, do whatever you want, potentially avodah zarah, and then just sneak back in as if you never left, we're not going to accept you then. You need to make a public declaration because we can hold you accountable, then we'll accept you back. But it was consistent. And then the halacha was decided that in any situation, you come back publicly or privately, native born or convert, you are always welcome to come back because you're always halakhically Jewish, so you always have an invitation to come back. Even if you don't make the public declaration, we're going to meet you where you are and we're going to accept you. So what you find in some places, like Chabad, they'll say, well, if someone is a native born, well, we'll accept them back publicly or privately. If you can't keep all the law, if you don't want to commit to this, just come in. You're always welcome. This is the halakha. We always accept them, even if they're participating in Shabbat.
Unless you're a convert and don't know all the law, then we won't accept you back.
That's the point that I'm making. They'll claim this is the halakha. We always accept them back in every generation, in every circumstance, publicly, privately, even if they're desecrating Shabbat. We'll hope that they'll learn something while they're here and they'll improve and they'll get better. That's the goal. So they take that lenient approach and they apply that to native borns. But then when it comes to the convert, as Moshe just brought up, well, here, if you're not frum, then you're not serious. That's not valid. You didn't really accept the yoke of Torah, so they're going to go with the first opinion. Once you leave, that's it. There's no coming back. Even though you converted, we found out you did something that's not in line with Orthodox standards, so we're going to invalidate your conversion, which is against halakha to do. But they'll take this very strict approach, even though the halakha was decided differently. So they'll take the Frankenstein opinion and say, well, we like this strictness opinion. We'll apply that to converts. But we like this really lenient opinion, and we'll apply that to the native born. Well, if you look at any of these three opinions, all of them were consistent. The first opinion was consistently strict for native born and converts. The second opinion was we'll accept you back publicly for native born and converts, not privately for native born or converts. They didn't do this Frankenstein stuff. And then the halakha was decided in all cases, in all generations, we always accept all of them back, whether it's publicly or privately, native born and converts. So it's consistent. So to come and split this up and say we're going to apply the lenient part to you because we like your DNA, we like that your mother's Jewish, but you're a convert, we're going to apply the strict opinion to you. That is mistreating a convert. And in Asuri Bia, chapter 12, halakha 17, Rambam tells us that there is no difference between the native born and the convert. You read the commentary there, and it says with regards to religious observance, which is exactly where this comes from. If you're going to come back and be religiously observant, the native born or the convert, it's the same. And we see the source for that. I think the source that he's coming from is in Demai. It's either in the Mishnah there or the Tosefta that accompanies that. So if you come across that, let me know which one it is, because it's one of these two in that section. So yeah, I don't know how you would argue against that and say, oh, we don't go by that. There's a popular opinion that came later on from the Tanya that says there's I don't know what the argue how they justify it, because we're going back from Rambam into here and seeing where that stems from. So I think they're just wrong for doing it. If somebody has a valid,
I once started to study Tanya, and they say that the neshama is not allowed to be broken. So technically, if you convert, you don't have the same neshama as a native born. And that's why they make the difference, probably.
So this is an area of contradiction, because they'll tell you that if you convert, then you had a Jewish soul. So you had a Jewish soul before you converted, and that's your Jewish soul returning to Judaism. So then the question comes up, well, if I had a Jewish soul, then how is it you could tell me to break Shabbat? Why is it that you would treat me differently than someone who already converted? Oh, well, then you didn't get the Jewish soul until you come out of the mikvah. Then you go into that's when you get the Jewish soul, after you come out of the mikvah. Well, this is problematic too. Are we soul swapping here? How does that work? So then they'll say, well, you always had a Jewish soul from the beginning, but I shouldn't be held accountable for telling you to violate Shabbat because, I didn't know that you had a Jewish soul until you went into the mikvah, even though the only reason you weren't going into a mikvah is I wouldn't permit you to go in. So the answer they'll come up with to try and harmonize this is, well, you had a Jewish soul from the beginning, but once you went into the mikvah, then your Jewish soul got an upgrade. You got the Jewish soul 2.0. So which one is it? So to go back to this, when you're in the Mishnah or the Tosefta, the Mai, whichever one this is found in, this is not even brought up as an argument. Do we accept them back because he has a Jewish soul? Is it a non-Jewish soul posing with a Jewish soul? It's not even mentioned. They don't even discuss it as part of the equation of should we factor this into what's the halakha? The Chachamim, the wise men say we always accept them back in any case in all generations, whether publicly or privately. So how you are to proceed halakhically is if someone comes in, they're coming back, you are to accept them. You're certainly not to say, well, we apply the law differently based on whether you have a Jewish neshama, I suspect, or maybe a non-Jewish neshama, I suspect. I mean, if the Tanya wants to do that, I question the authoritativeness of the Tanya, which is a much later book, far after the Mishnah, far after the Gemara, far after Mishnah Torah, you know. So I mean, your opinion can be what you speculate is going on with this person's soul, but how you behave is a matter of law. And they don't even bring that into as part of the equation to determine what the law should be. So I think they're violating the law to deviate from this and say, well, we're going to apply it differently. You're not supposed to be more frum than Chazal. And Chazal said, this is how you apply the law, and I'm going to do it to native borns, but I'm going to do it differently in a way that they didn't even do it, the converts. I think that is falls under the category of mistreating converts. And I think they're going to have to bring a better argument than, well, the Tanya says to convince me of it. All right, so Midrash Halacha, this Midrashim, these stories are how we derive laws for Halacha, how you apply the law. So Midrash Agadah is a different form. These are this is more narrative. All right, I forgot where we left off. Did we even read this, or did this all come from the discussion when we were about to read Midrash Halacha?
We read 1 and 2, but we didn't expand on it.
Okay, I think we expanded on this one pretty good. All right, Midrash Agadah. We read this one too?
I thought so.
We did not read part 2.
Yeah, I think we took the off ramp here and went on the detour.
Midrash Agadah. This form of Midrash is more narrative and theological, seeking to explain the ethical, moral, and theological dimensions of the Torah. Midrash Agadah may include stories, parables, homilies, and explorations of the inner lives of biblical figures. It is often where deeper spiritual meaning and lessons are found.
Okay, so this is where we fill in the gaps with stories like, I was in a synagogue one time and the rabbi asked, who remembers in Bereshit, book of Genesis, where Abraham smashed the idols and except for one, and his father comes home and he says, what happened here? And Abraham points to the one and says, that one did it. And his father says, how could he? It's just a stone statue. It doesn't have the power to do anything like this. And Abraham says, that's the point. And there's people raising their hands. Yeah, I remember that. It's not in Torah. It's a story that is not written in Torah. So this is what Midrash Agadah is. You're not getting a law from that. You're not getting a halakha that we don't bow down in front of idols. You're just getting stories in the narrative portion. So like I brought up earlier, what happens when Midrashim contradict each other? Which one is right? The reason for that is in different periods of time, you had this community in France dealing with this challenge and a different community in Spain dealing with a different challenge. So the rabbis in each area, in different eras, different generations, had to come up with different answers to help people through the different challenges that they were facing. So this is why we have different midrashim that sometimes contradict each other. And so this is where the level of subjectivity is. Now, technically, midrash, as this mentioned earlier, comes from the drash. from the Torah. So if it's not a Torah-based story, like we just talked about with Abraham, then you're dealing with Hasidic tales. I was in Chabad once, and the rabbi was telling the story about how um, this jewelry owner in New York, it was time for Shabbat. They just lit the candles, and I guess this was maybe in the 90s, and they had caller ID because the phone rang, somebody called, and they knew it was the alarm company. So there must be a problem at the jewelry store, which was closed for Shabbat. So he's debating, do I answer the phone? It's Shabbat. So he decides, I'm not going to answer it. It's Shabbat. Whatever happens, it's in Hashem's hands. So he was kind of nervous the whole Shabbat. So right after Shabbat, he goes down there to the jewelry store, and there's a police officer standing there. And he says, what happened? The police officer says, somebody came and broke in. And so the guy says, well, I saw the phone call, but I didn't come because it was Shabbat. So the police officer says, it's a good thing you didn't, because these guys have done this like 5 times before. Their MO, their method or motive of operation is they break into the jewelry store, they wait for the owner to come in, and then they take the owner hostage. They tell the owner to open the safe, they get the money out of the safe, and then they kill the owner. If you would have came down here, you would be dead. We've been trying to catch these guys, and we finally caught them. So the lesson here is, when you're thinking, well, maybe this is more important than Shabbat, you should keep Shabbat. Put your faith in Hashem's hands. Is this a literal story that actually happened? Maybe. Did it not happen at all? There's reasons to suspect that as well. Does it seem likely that all these people that own the jewelry stores would get there before the police? Does it seem likely that the police would station somebody there and wait the whole time until the owner shows up after they've made the arrest? I'm not sure that that's always the case. So this is how we look at Midrashim. Is it a literal story? Is it made up just to convey a message? Or is there some elements of both in it? But obviously we're talking about something in New York City, phone calls, New York City police officer. So this is not from the Torah. So this is kind of more like a Hasidic tale, just to teach a lesson. To be Midrash usually means it's coming from the Torah, but it's the same kind of concept. So that's Midrash Agadah, not something you get a law from, like halacha. Halacha would be you do this, don't do that. In this case, you're just getting an ethical, moral, theological lesson here. So that's the difference between Agadah and halacha. And so Agadah kind of fills in the gaps. Okay, makes sense? All right, let's continue.
Yeah.
You still reading, Moshe?
Yeah, okay, here we go. Hold on a minute. Key themes in the Midrash. 1. Filling in the gaps. The Torah often leaves questions unanswered. Midrashim, the plural form of Midrash, attempts to, well, that's anything that ends in a im with a im would indicate that it's plural. Attempted to address the quote unquote silences or ambiguities in the biblical narrative by offering stories, explanations, and interpretations to fill in these gaps. For example, the Midrash expands on why Cain's offering was rejected, or what happened during the Israelites wandering in the desert. And number 2, moral and ethical lessons. Many Midrashim use biblical stories to impart lessons on how to live a righteous life. These stories often aim to inspire virtuous behavior, such as compassion, humility, and justice. Divine providence. Midrash often emphasizes the belief in divine intervention and the idea that God is actively involved in the lives of individuals and the Jewish people. It seeks to reveal God's purpose and plans through the narratives of biblical features.
Divine Intervention is an awesome album, by the way. If you guys want to look that up, if you're into that kind of music, highly recommend it.
God came down here and stopped the bullets.
Pulp Fiction.
Yeah. I just don't think that this should be overlooked. You know, uh, divine providence. Okay, allegory and symbolism. Midrash frequently uses allegorical interpretations to draw moral or spiritual lessons. For example, the relationship between God and Israel might be likened to a relationship between a king and his beloved child, or between a shepherd and his flock. Midrash on the Hebrew language. This midrash often explores the nuance of language in the Torah, focusing on unusual word choices, repetitions, or apparent contradictions. Midrashic explanations help uncover hidden meanings in the sacred texts.
I would put gematria in this category also. Numerology. The
Oh yeah,
value of this word is the same as the numerical value of that word. So therefore, there must be a connection, even though there's all these other words that have the same
yeah.
numerical value.
Rabbis will do the gematria and the numerical stuff all the time.
Sort of a parlor trick, but there's people that find a lot of meaning in it, and some of it is interesting. So here again is where the subjectivity comes in. Do you find this as a code that needs to be deciphered that Hashem hidden in there, or if the fact that it's hidden means we can get by with the plain reading? And we'll go through that too with the Peshat and the Drash. That'll be coming up.
Famous Midrashim and stories. Here are some well-known Midrashic stories and teachings that illustrate the nature of Midrash. Number one, the creation of the world. The Midrash teaches that before God created the world, he consulted with the Torah itself. Personified as a divine blueprint, this elevates the Torah as a co-creator with God.
Says
Uh,
he had to look into the Torah
I,
before he started creation to see what to create on what day so he could follow the blueprint. This
but
is
if God created everything, then he would have created the Torah. So why would he need to look into the Torah if he created it? See, I don't get that.
kind of a conundrum.
I don't.
So
I don't go along with that. I know a couple of guys that do, but I don't, and I think that that's just weird.
so this is a great example where they take that literally and they find meaning in it. You just take what you need from it, and you carry on with it. So this is the subjectivity. We're not required to believe this and that. We're required legally to do this and that. And this is a matter of belief. So we can't be adjudicated on that. Okay, number two.
The binding of Isaac, Isaac, Akedah. The Midrashic
Akeda.
story tells of Isaac's willingness. What?
The
Akedah.
Akeda.
A cadence.
Akeda. This is
I know, but I was thinking about like a drum cadence, you know.
yeah.
The Midrashic story tells of Isaac's willingness to go with his father to be sacrificed, showcasing Isaac's own righteousness and obedience. Some Midrashim even suggest that Isaac, as an adult, had a miraculous knowledge of what was to happen.
Yeah, he was supposedly in his 30s when this happened. I've even heard Midrash that Isaac had equivalent to Down syndrome. Now, this is why he was willing to be put on the altar without putting up a fight. A lot of people have a problem with that, but I mean, if you look it up, there are people that have that opinion, and they point to other things in the text to support that conclusion. But again, it's not in the text, so it's just Midrash. It's just opinions on the story that a lot of people won't take literally.
The Exodus from Egypt. A Midrash elaborates on the miracles that took place during the Exodus, such as the parting of the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. It also emphasizes that the idea that the Egyptians' pursuit of the Israelites was a part of God's greater plan to show his power. Mm-hmm. The golden calf. The Midrash explains that when the Israelites worshiped the golden calf, they were not necessarily abandoning God completely, but rather seeking an intermediary to connect them to the divine after Moses' prolonged absence. This offers an insight into human nature and the desire for tangible representations of spirituality. The reward of Ruth. The Midrash offers additional details about Ruth's lineage and the eventual birth of King David. It emphasizes her selflessness and loyalty as exemplary characteristics, and the Midrash suggests that Ruth's conversion was a key moment in the history of Israel. The purpose of the Midrash. The Midrash serves several important purposes. Number one, to explain and interpret the text. The Torah and the foundational texts of Judaism is seen as having endless layers of meaning. Midrash helps unlock those meanings, making the text relevant to each generation and culture. To teach ethical lessons. Midrash often aims to illustrate how we should act in the world. The stories are not just about the past, they serve as guides for living a moral, Torah-based life. To elevate the narrative. Midrash often gives a deeper, more nuanced view of biblical events. The lives of the patriarchs, matriarchs, and even lesser known figures are made more vivid and accessible through midrashic stories to connect the Jewish people to their history. Midrash helps Jews understand their unique covenant with God and their relationship to the land of Israel. Through Midrash, Jews can feel a more personal connection to the biblical ancestors and the divine narrative. I keep saying that because I'm thinking about David over there in Italy. Midrashic method. Okay, Midrash often employs various methods of interpretation. Here are a few important ones.
All right, so vocabulary for those that don't know, this is a gezerah shava. So you probably heard of like a takana or a gezerah. So a gezerah is a decree, usually saying we're going to prohibit something to prevent you from, like putting a fence around something. We're going to prohibit you from getting close to the mitzvah that we don't want you to break. The takana is the opposite. We're going to create something that you need to do. Like saying kiddush, this is not in Torah, so we've created something that you're a baracha that you're going to say over that. So gezerah usually is a prohibition, but it is a decree. So in this context is being used as a decree, shava of equivalency. This one is the same as that. So for those who know what that means, that's where this has come from. Go ahead.
Okay, that's a comparison between two texts based on a common word or phrase. If two verses share a similar phrase, the Midrash might deduce that the meaning of the two verses is related.
Binyan Av. Av is like father.
Binyan.
So we're building a father. It's more like we're building a foundation because we have principles like the avot, like the fathers, and then you have like the toldot, the children. So we have one law, which would be like the av, and then the next law derives from that, and then the next one derives from that. Those are the toldot. So this is kind of like the building blocks, like the foundation of things that things will stem from that later.
Binyan is a principle that involves deriving a rule from a specific example in the Torah and applying it to similar situations elsewhere in the text.
Okay.
Peshat and Drash.
You've heard of Pardes? I've heard it referred to as like an acronym for orchard. So the rabbis in the Talmud, they went into Pardes, like the orchard, I guess. And they had 4 different outcomes. This one died, this one went insane. So each one is tied to that. So Pardes is Peshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. The Peshat is the plain literal meaning. We like that. Because once you leave there, you have Midrashim, which is seeking out the explanation of it. So that's the Drash. But the Peshat is what it is. And this is what we need to learn to separate. The Peshat literally says this, the literal words that you read in the Torah. And we'll see examples later of where people will leave the Peshat and insert Midrashim as if it was Peshat, as if it was literally what you're reading in the Torah. So the Peshat you can't go wrong with because you're literally just reading what the Torah says. The Remez is like a hint. Okay, well, this is hinting at this other thing. Well, it could be hinting at lots of things if that's your narrative and that's what you want it to. So oftentimes you'll see what's called an asmakta. Well, we take what we want, and then we go back and look where can we find it in the Torah. So that's the remez. Well, this is hinting at that. You see Christians do it all the time. Well, JC is in the Torah. Where? Well, it's in the beginning of Bereshit. Look, it's plural. So it says, "Let
It's
us."
in Isaiah.
That's
Yeah, they
Hashem
say
and JC communicating about how we're going to do this. So they're inserting that in Bereshit. Well, that's the hint. That's what's hinting at the Trinity. So Pashat is the plain reading. Remez, it's hinting at whatever you want it to hint to. Drash, that's what we're seeking out. That's what we're discussing here. We're seeking out the meaning. That's Midrashim. And then Sod is like the secrets. Nobody knows unless you come and we tell you the secrets. We have the secret information. So that's Pardes. It's an acronym. Peshat, Remez, Drash, Sod. We like the Peshat because how can you argue with what it actually says? And the Drash when used properly. Not so much into the Remez and the Sod. Okay, so Moshe, continue, if you would.
okay then. Peshat refers to the simple literal meaning of the text, while Drash refers to the deeper interpretive meaning. Midrash often shifts between these modes to bring out explanations of the Torah. The homiletical approach. Some Midrashim are intended to be read as homilies or sermons, where the moral lesson is the primary focus. Studying Midrash as a convert. For someone converting to Orthodox Judaism, understanding Midrash is an important step in integrating into the Jewish community. Midrash reveals the living nature of the Torah and the ways in which Jewish thinkers have wrestled with the text over centuries. It highlights the values of Torah study, the importance of questioning, and the pursuit of deeper spiritual understanding. I would also add that quite frequently I find myself making my own midrash, and you'll catch yourself doing it too. We do it all the time. We pashkin, and we make our own midrash. And I would argue that our own pashkining is just as valid as the pashkining in the Gemara. On an individual basis.
Well, we're not making up things that we poskin off of. We poskin or conclude off of what the law and the Talmud says. And
Well, specifically off of what the law in the Mishnah says.
Right, or what Rambam gives us.
Right.
But not off of things like that we're making up.
Right. No. If I pashkin and I say, oh well, it's like you were saying earlier in the Pesha. Well, we've got the Pesha. Well, it literally says this. Okay, well, I literally think that means this, and we do it all the time.
But to be clear, it literally says chop the hands off of women. We don't poskin by what it literally says there. There we follow the actual halakha that the Sanhedrin how they enforce that, which is that it's a monetary fine, not a literal hand being chopped off. So we can't just say, all right, well, I poskin off the peshat. We do have to actually follow the halakhic process, lest somebody think that we would be doing things like that. All right, discussion questions.
Why do you think the Jewish tradition places such importance on interpretation, especially through Midrash? Well, for what you just said, so we don't go around literally chopping people's hands off.
Lots of different reasons. All right, let's try and go through these quick because we got two other documents I want to go through.
How do Midrashim help explain difficult or challenge passages in the Torah? How do Midrashim help explain difficult or challenging passages in the Torah?
I think we just gave an example of one.
How can studying Midrash deepen your relationship with the Torah and God and with God?
Number four.
So, do you see any parallels between the Midrashic approach to biblical texts and how we engage with stories in modern life? Oh, yeah.
And the conclusion.
And then Midrash is a central part of Jewish tradition, offering layers of meaning and interpretation that makes the Torah to come alive. For a convert to Orthodox Judaism, learning to engage with Midrash is an important way to connect with the heritage, wisdom, and ongoing conversation that has shaped Jewish thought for centuries. This chapter introduces Midrash as a foundational aspect of Jewish study, which can be particularly enriching for those on a path of conversion
All right,
to conversion.
everybody good with this
It
document?
encourages learners.
Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off. I thought you were at the end there. Go
Well,
ahead.
I got one more.
Go
It
ahead.
encourages learners to appreciate both the textual and interpretive depth of the Jewish tradition.
It does. All right, everybody good with this document?
I'm good with
Yeah.
that.
I don't know.
What do you got?
Controversial opinion, maybe. Because, of course, in Ashkenazi Judaism, it's a bit different. I'm in Ashkenaz, like in literal Ashkenaz in Germany. So the approach is a bit stricter on women studying this. So basically, I mean, like the theory of going into this as a deeper understanding and being a better part or being, I don't know, part of the Jewish people is nice. But on the practical part is, yeah, how to find people, especially as a woman.
Yeah, that's well, we're very more friendly there. I'm glad you used the word controversial because this is the positive one. We're going to get progressively more controversial. The second one that we're about to go through is where we're going to find more people that disagree with us. And then the third one is the gloves have come off. We're at full-blown controversial. As far as women, I don't like the idea of saying, well, women are not allowed to study this. It is sort of a men's club, but I mean, who raises their daughters like this? We want our daughters to be, you know, dependent on the men and ignorant and, rather than teaching them to be independent and a part of this. So we encourage women learning this stuff around here.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
I do too. I mean, as far as I know, I had this debate in a different study group that the prohibition on women studying Talmud only is about what the community has to say, because then you step out of the classical way of womanhood
So
in
this is
this.
why it's so important to separate what's minhag, custom and tradition, halacha,
Mm-hmm.
actual law, and mitzvot, the actual Torah law. It's in the Shulchan Aruch, not the Kitzur, but the Gadol, that women are not allowed to be called up to the Torah during these times. Well, that means there's no prohibition for calling them up to the Torah during other times. So you could come in and say, well, our minhag is that we don't do it. We don't allow women to do it. Is that a good minhag? If it's not halakhically prohibited, then why are you doing it? And
Right.
they'll
That's
come up.
almost as bad as like mistreating the convert.
Yeah, but the convert is specifically mentioned in Torah. The mistreating convert is one of the sins Hashem would be willing to destroy the Jewish people over. So I would say that's an even bigger crime, but that doesn't excuse the lesser crime. Okay, I am so.
But I want, may I add something? Like, of course, it comes from Israel again. There's a whole homepage dedicated to women and mitzvot. Out, and there's a big section about women reading from the Torah. I can share it in the group chat if there's interest,
Yeah, of
because
course.
that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, share that.
I go to a conservative shul. They do it all the time.
And I also recommend Chaim Ovadia. He is very big on including women in this stuff, so he can probably give you a lot of other sources too on that topic. Okay, I don't know how to hit a back button to get back to the main screens. Maybe somebody can help me with that on the next one. So what I've been doing is hitting the X to close the entire thing and then opening up Word again to go to the next one. Kind of annoying when you're editing and going back and forth. Okay, the second one, that was understanding Midrashim. I think the second one. Okay, this is another issue that I have. When I first created this one, I wrote chapter and just saved it for a minute. Now I don't know how to go in and edit this to name it something different. So I'm stuck with chapter. So this is how ignorant I am when it comes to you doing things on the computer. The full title was chapter Absurdities in Midrash, Maimonides. For anyone listening that doesn't know, this is Rambam. You usually hear me refer to him as Rambam. Rambam's view and the art of interpretation. So now we're going to move a little more controversial. Anybody want to read this one? Anyone? Any new readers that haven't read yet? Any women care to? We want to be inclusive here. If they're
Ash
available.
said she'd be right back. I don't know where she went.
All right, we'll see if she wants to come back and read.
Okay, because you became progressive overnight, I'm gonna read.
Uh, I'm in that direction. I wouldn't say I flipped like a light switch.
He's always been that way.
Yeah, go ahead. But I
Okay.
appreciate volunteering. Go ahead.
Chapter Absurdities in Midrash Maimonides' View and the Art of Interpretation. Objective: to explore some of the more fantastical and absurd elements found in Midrashim, to understand Maimonides' Rambam approach to the interpretation of Midrash, to learn how to identify when a Midrash is intended as a literal story or as a homiletic lesson, and the importance of this distinction for proper understanding. Absurd or fantastical examples in Midrashim. Midrash is often highly imaginative, and while many of its stories are profound and spiritual uplifting, others can seem quite absurd or far-fetched. This creative aspect is intended to teach moral lessons, explore hidden meanings, or address gaps in the biblical narrative. Below are some examples of fantastical or absurd midrashim that can sometimes lead to confusion if taken literal. The earth speaking to Adam. In Midrash Breshit Rabbah 18:3, it is stated that after Adam was created, the earth itself spoke to him, saying, "I am the one who will bury you." This is not a historical claim, but a metaphorical statement about human mortality, which is framed in an allegorical manner. The serpent and the thank you.
Yeah, allegorical. It's if you don't know the word, it's like, well, which way do we pronounce the G? That's one of the things I like about Hebrew better, is the Nakud tells you how. So even in English, I have to guess. But here with the earth speaking to Adam, I think most of us agree with this definition. Although, like Moshe pointed out earlier, we do know guys that say, well, if it's in the Talmud, it's not wrong, you know. So there are people that will take things like this literally.
Oh my goodness. The serpent and the commandments. The Talmud Sanhedrin 29a says that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was able to speak. Later, Midrashim expand on this, suggesting that the serpent was a physical manifestation of Satan or some other supernatural force. This fantastical element is not meant to be taken literal, but to explain the moral dangers of temptation. Sanhedrin 29a. Since God instructed Adam and Eve not to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve should have heeded God's words and not those of the snake. Hiskia says, from where is it derived that anyone who adds subtracts? It is derived from a verse, as it stated that Eve said, God has said, you shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it. Genesis 3:3, whereas God had actually rendered prohibited only eating from the tree, but not touching it. As it is stated, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat of it. Genesis 2:17. Because Eve added that there was a prohibition against touching the tree, the snake showed her that touching it does not cause her to die, and she consequently sinned by eating from it as well.
Okay, so everybody understand what's going on in this midrash? If you read the Peshat in the Torah, God tells Adam, don't eat from this tree. That's it. That's what he says. But when Adam tells Eve, don't eat from the tree and don't touch it. So the question comes up, well, why didn't she quote verbatim what God said to Adam? Evidently, he didn't, and he told her, don't even touch it, trying to put an extra restriction, an extra fence around it, gezerah, if you will. So then the Midrash comes in, and the longer version says, well, did he really say you can't touch it or eat of it or you'll die? And she said, yes, of course. Why would I question these things? So then he pushes her up and she touches the tree, and then she didn't die. So then he was able to convince her, well, look, if it's okay to touch the tree, which you thought was prohibited, then it's also going to be okay to eat from it. So because he didn't just say what God said, don't eat from this tree, he added to it. So don't touch it either. She was able to be deceived, and obviously bad things happen. So apply this to halacha. If it says don't do this, that's what it means. Why would you come in with a minhag later and say we're going to make it more restrictive, and then we're going to restrict it more so you don't come close to violating the minhag that was added to keep you away from the halakha that was added to keep you away from the mitzvah? So this is one example of,
Chicken and cheese.
and we've gone over that example on probably every other video here, so we've been down that rabbit hole. But this is an example of where making things harder than it has to be can have negative consequences. And then there's other midrashim that say he didn't just push her into the tree, he did other terrible things to her, and that's why it's in the category of midrashim, because it's not literally in the text. So that's a lesson that we can learn from this. Trying to make everything extra difficult lead to consequences for people. Them just violating everything and dropping the whole thing because they think this minhag is the requirement. It's not just a humrah, an optional stringency. So that's why our philosophy is be able to separate minhag from halacha, from mitzvot. And if you embrace the humrah, if that's how you connect to Hashem, then by all means.
And then there's the Midrash of Lilith.
Yeah, so if you want to just do what's required, I don't think that that will be held against you. And in order to decide what you want to embrace and what is like this being unnecessarily added as an additional restriction that's not for you, that's how you need to know how to identify it. So you can say that humor is not for me. So I thought this was a great example that I personally added to this. Okay.
Moses as a prince in Egypt. One Midrash, Exodus Rabbah 129, suggests that Moses had been so deeply steeped in Egyptian knowledge that he was able to speak all 70 languages of the world. While this showcases Moses' great wisdom, it's an exaggeration meant to highlight his preparedness for leadership, not a literal historical account. God's creation of light before the sun. Midrash Tanhuma in Parashat Breshit states that God created light before the sun and that this light was hidden away for the righteous in the world to come. This reflects a theological point about the hidden nature of ultimate divine wisdom and the eventual revelation of spiritual light. But the story itself is not a physical description of creation. That's interesting. The Red Sea stands as walls of water. In the Midrash and Talmud, we are told that when the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, Sea of Reeds, the water stood up like walls on either side. Exodus 14:21. Some Midrashim even describe the sea as forming 12 separate paths, one for each tribe. While the general story is preserved in the Torah, the Midrash adds fantastic details to illustrate the miraculous nature of the event. These types of midrashim are not necessarily meant to be taken literal, but serve as tools to convey deeper truth, divine power, or ethical lessons. Their fantastical nature makes them effective for evoking wonder and illustrating concepts that go beyond mere historical events.
If anyone's wondering, the reason I keep putting Sea of Reeds here is because this is the actual translation. It's Yam Suf. But so many people say the Red Sea that this is what people are going to be, a lot of people are used to hearing. But I don't want people to read this and say, well, they don't really know it's Yam Suf. So this is the correct translation of it. But so I'm leaving both in here. Okay, now we get to Rambam. This is how we roll around here.
Should I go on?
Yeah, please.
Maimonides, Maimonides Rambam approached the Midrash. Maimonides, in his Guide for the Perplexed, Part 2, Chapter 25, famously addresses the relationship between reason, scripture, and Midrash. He warns against the danger of taking all Midrashim literal, asserting that this can lead to misunderstanding and distortion of the Torah's true message. Rambam's key points in Midrash. Taking Midrash literal, Rambam categorically states that anyone who takes all Midrashim literal is a fool. He views the Midrash as a form of interpretive discourse designed to reveal deeper truth that may not always be expressed plainly in the Torah. To insist on a literal.
Notice here, he actually insults these people that do this. But he doesn't go to the other extreme end either. You'll see where you're going to end up is where you should be, is in the middle. So this here is.
Yeah, well, you need to be like some kind of smart to get through all the metaphors and everything. So
Yeah,
maybe he's right.
usually he is.
Dismissal of all Midrashim. Conversely, Rambam also warns that anyone who dismisses all Midrashim as irrelevant or purely fictional is also a fool. For Rambam, Midrash is a legitimate form of interpretation that contributes significantly to the understanding of the Torah. It may not always be literal, but it provides important ethical, moral, and theological insight.
So the famous example that he brings up is that if somebody struggles with anger, then what they should do is go to the opposite end of the spectrum and focus on being extremely happy. I mean, this is what I thought I was going to benefit from at Chabad. And the example that he brings is that if a child, somebody is killed or something outrageous is happening, like if a child is getting, harmed, and then the crowd justifiably wants to lynch the guy. Since you are someone that struggles with anger on this end of the spectrum, you're supposed to go to the opposite end of the spectrum. You're supposed to be happy. So how can you be happy when you see something that's upsetting the whole town? There, because you're supposed to be happy, you would stand out. People would say, well, are you in on this? Are you sadistic? Are you evil? So there, you need to show anger, just like the rest of the crowd is, but you shouldn't actually be trying to feel anger because you struggle with anger. So you should only be demonstrating the amount of anger that won't make you stand out as odd. Like, why are you not angry when you see this injustice happening? So that where you will end up focusing on the happiness all the time, you'll end up somewhere in the middle, which is where you should be. Take the middle path. So that's the example that he gives. But you see, he applies it to here, the middle path. So it's not just that one example that he gave. It's all throughout life. Extremism is bad on either side of the spectrum. So this is where I think, and apparently Rambam thinks, we should end up in the middle is the little sweet spot. That's where we need to aim for.
But regarding to your example, from a psychological point of view, you should not go into the other extreme to find the middle. But anyway, that's modern stuff.
Well, that's the example that he gives. So with anger, you should go to the other and focus on the positive and being happy. You're saying that you disagree with that?
Yes, because in like anger management theory, you look what's behind your anger. Mostly it's grief that you cannot comprehend in your conscious. And like when you're in an anger management class, they probably would say, find a way to express this grief, like in a manner that you can handle it.
So Rambam was a physician. He was a doctor to the Sultan of Egypt. So he says you should not follow the medical advice of Chazal because they lived way before him, and he was big into the modern. Back then, digestion was a big thing in medical science back then. So he says you should not follow his halakha when it comes to medical advice. You should follow the modern current medical advice, which means if he was alive today, he wouldn't even take his own medical advice that he gave us. So I guess we could apply that to mental psychology also. Maybe the psychology has evolved from his opinion, and we should follow those, like you're saying, the counselors of today. But I'll leave that for the individuals to decide their personal what they think they need when it comes to matters like that of trauma. But in general, I tend to agree. However you get there, the middle of the road is probably where most of us should be.
Yeah, that's something I also can agree. Shall I go on?
Yeah, because this is where we get to the conclusion on the first two extreme ends of the spectrum.
Subjectivity and interpretation. Since the Torah does not provide a definite list of which midrashim should be taken literal and which ones should not, there is a level of subjectivity involved in the interpretation. Rambam advocates for a thoughtful, discerning approach where one uses reason and understanding of the context to decide whether a particular midrash is meant to be understood literal or metaphorically.
So there you go. Take what you need from it, and this is going to be different for every individual. But this empowers the individual to say, this is what I need, this is what it does for me, and this is how I connect to it. So it's kind of wrong to tell somebody, well, your approach is different than mine on this midrash. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
The importance of allegory and metaphor. Rambam frequently emphasizes that the Torah often speaks in metaphor, parable, and allegory, especially in cases where the language is figurative or the subject matter is beyond human comprehension. Midrash, in its more fantastical aspects, may serve to communicate spiritual truth and moral lessons, not historical or physical facts. The Rambam's direct quote in Guide for the Perplexed, Part 2, Chapter 25, Rambam writes, "The words of the Midrash that have no apparent logical sense are to be interpreted allegorically, and one who does not understand this is a fool. At the same time, to dismiss all Midrashim as fictitious or unnecessary is also a mistake, as they often express the deeper wisdom of the Torah." Quote end. This quote reflects Rambam's balanced approach, respect for Midrash's spiritual depth, while acknowledging that it's not always meant to be read as literal history. The importance of identifying Midrash versus Torah narrative. When studying Midrash, it is crucial to distinguish between literal Torah narrative and Midrashic interpretation. Many times, rabbis may present Midrashim during sermons or lectures without clearly indicating whether these teachings are meant as a straightforward retelling of biblical events or as interpretive stories that fill in the gaps of the text. Here are a few principles for recognizing when a midrash is being presented and understanding how to approach it. Context of the midrash. If the rabbi or teacher is providing an explanation or homily on a specific Torah verse and then tells a story that does not directly appear in the Torah, it's likely in Midrash. If the story seems to be adding details that aren't present in the text, like the earth speaking to Adam, this is a strong sign that it's Midrashic. Language of the rabbi. Often when delivering a Midrashic story, a rabbi will preface it with something like, "Our sages say," or "It is written in the Midrash," signaling that what is coming is not literal but a teaching or allegory. A sermon that treats a story as though it is the literal historical truth without providing this distinction can lead to confusion. In these cases, the audience might misunderstand the Midrash as part of the canonical Torah narrative. Style and nature of the story. Midrashim often feature dramatic or supernatural elements that aren't found in the Torah text. If the story is particularly fantastical or exaggerated, it's probably a midrashic interpretation. If the story introduces characters or events that aren't in the text but explain a moral or theological point, this is a clue that the story is midrashic. The purpose of the midrash. Midrash is often used to explain the why of a narrative or to explore meanings behind a seemingly simple passage. If a story is being told to elaborate on a Torah verse in a non-literal way, such as explaining the inner thoughts of a biblical character, it's likely midrash and not part of the actual historical account. The subjectivity and importance of discernment. In some, midrash is a valuable part of Jewish tradition, offering depth, moral teaching, and spiritual insights. However, it is essential to be able to distinguish between midrash and literal narrative of the Torah. Rambam's wisdom reminds us that one must use reason and context when interpreting midrash and avoid both extreme literalism and complete dismissal. As learners of Torah, it is our responsibility to identify when a story is meant to be allegorically or homiletic, rather than a literal event in the history of the Jewish people.
So that's Rambam's position on it. I appreciate the readers. When I have to read it all myself, my voice gets hoarse at the end of these classes. All right, the third one, famous and concise examples of Midrashim. Some of these might be famous, but my goal with some of these here is to make them famous. So I've included a couple of my personal ones that I think should be in here. Not to make anything look negative, but there's going to be examples where you're going to come across problematic things. And oftentimes when people are converting, they feel like they're in a position of a disadvantage. I didn't grow up Jewish. He knows more than I do. Who am I to question what I'm hearing? If he's saying it, it must be right because he's popular and he uses a lot of Hebrew vocabulary. He's got a beard and a black hat. So who am I? So I don't want people to have this impression that, well, we should just blindly follow whatever we hear. So here, I'm going to read these. And my goal is just to expose people to it, to understand, just like there's a level of subjectivity, you have to, as an individual, decide what you accept and what you don't. They're not all good. Most of them are. The overwhelming majority are. But nobody should be blinded to think that there's no problems coming out of this. So that's why I want to highlight a couple problematic ones. And I go through and I sort of debunk one myself. And people will disagree. That's fine. But I'm going to show you the process that I used to debunk one of them that I personally had a problem with. So these two here, we're looking at Midrash Halacha and then Midrash Halacha. Or no, I'm sorry. Down here is when we get to Midrash Halacha. So this is where I wanted to put it in the first one where it tells you the difference, but I couldn't really make it flow right, so I just added them over here. Okay, so a famous example of Midrash Halacha comes from the Sifrei. Again, this is one of the Baraitot. It's a Midrash on the book of Numbers, specifically on this verse in you know what? I'm gonna have to go back and look at this. Why is it quoting Numbers? But then here we have Deuteronomy, so I don't have to go back and fix this. Okay, so it's quoting this verse that says, when you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay in fulfilling it. The Midrash explains the meaning of this verse by stating, you should not delay, refers to the obligation to fulfill one's vow promptly. And it teaches that a delay in fulfilling a vow is in fact a violation of the Torah commandment. And this teaching found in the Sifri is used to derive the halakhic principle that when one makes a vow, it must be fulfilled without unnecessary delay. This is an example of how Midrash Halacha takes a verse from the Torah and extracts specific legal guidance, often interpreting words or phrases to inform Jewish law and practice. Okay, another great example. So again, this is not just a story, it's telling you how do we behave. And there's entire books on this in the Mishnah Torah, which explains the length of a vow, what's the legal process for entering into it, when is it null and void. So it's again not story, it's laws on how you actually proceed and what you do and don't do. Okay, another great example of Midrash Halacha comes from the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of the Commandments. In the third mitzvah, we discuss which discusses the commandment to love God. In this text, the Rambam draws on the Sifri, a halakhic midrash on the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy. Okay, I guess that's why we have two different Numbers and Deuteronomy. They're both found in the Sifri. Okay, but here I'm literally quoting what Sefer HaMitzvot says, word for word. The Sifri quotes the verse, "And you shall love the Lord your God," and asks, how does one love God? The answer is found in the next part of the verse, "And these words that I commanded you today shall be upon your heart." The Sifri teaches the reflection on God's greatness. Through the study and contemplation of the Torah leads to the love of God. Rambam emphasizes that by contemplating God's wisdom and greatness, one can come to truly recognize God's perfection and greatness, which naturally leads to the joy and love of God. The midrashical explanation connects the loving God to a deeper intellectual engagement with his teachings and his laws, leading to emotional responses like praise and the desire to share his understanding with others. I started a long time ago. I said I'm going to go through Sefer HaMitzvot and I'm going to make videos, one for each one. And I ran out of time, but I did do this one, and I put some funny, funny pictures in there. So it gets the example I use there is if you think you have the best mechanic in town, then I put this picture of a goofy cartoon mechanic, then you're going to tell everybody about your mechanic. It can't be that, well, your mechanic is great, so you want him working on your vehicles, but for you, you just go to some other guy that'll rip you off. You go find some less inferior mechanic that only knows how to fix 7 things. So it's a funny video, but that's why I chose to put this one here because I thought it was a great example. So as Rambam notes, when a person loves something, they naturally praise it and seek to make others aware of it. Thus, the love for God leads to the natural act of sharing the beauty of God's commandments with others, which in turn is beneficial for the one who shares and for the listener. This Midrash Halacha highlights the active role of contemplation and intellectual engagement with the Torah in fostering deeper relationship with God, and how that relationship compels one to spread the message of Judaism. So much for the theory that proselytizing is prohibited in Judaism. We're literally told to do that in Sefer HaMitzvot. And also, you'll see people that say rationalists, they lack feeling. It's just focusing on law and everything has to make sense. It's an academic exercise. But this here shows you how some people just naturally feel love for God the same way they feel love for their children. They don't have to be told to love them. It just comes naturally. Other people, they don't have that feeling. But those who do have that feeling, Sefer HaMitzvot goes into how you're thinking about a new relationship with someone when you're eating and drinking, and when you wake up in the morning, when you lie down at night, are constantly on your mind. That love is what Rambam ties to this reflection on his greatness. Of all the things you could be doing, if you're thinking about his ways, his creation, the system that he put in place that leads to halakha and behavior and mitzvot, and you're contemplating these things the same way you would be thinking about someone that you love in a new relationship. So this intellectual contemplation is what Rambam says will lead to loving God in a deeper intellectual engagement. So it's not an invalid way of loving God by being intellectually tied to it the way others are emotionally tied to it. It's just as valid. So don't let people say because you're a rationalist and you want things to make sense, don't let them discount that because they have a different way. Okay, so again, these are examples of halacha, what you do. So let's look at Midrash Agadah, stories. A well-known example of Midrash Agadah is the story in the Talmud. And here is Sota, the end of 36b. This is the reverse. No, that's right. The end of 36b going into 37a is where you find it. And after the recording, if you want to read this, there's some other things in there that we can go over in this section that I didn't want to put on the recording. But if you're looking for this example, it's at the end of 36 into the beginning of 37. It's about the parting of the Sea of Reeds, the Yam Suf, during the Exodus. According to the Midrash, when the Israelites reached the sea and saw no apparent way to cross, the waters did not part immediately. The reason given is that the attribute of justice, din, was preventing the sea from splitting, as it argued that the Israelites were not yet worthy of the miracle. The attribute of mercy, rachamim, wanted to save the Israelites, but it couldn't do so without the cooperation of this other attribute. So oftentimes you see people making fun of Christians. Well, what if the Trinity, what if the Father disagrees with the Son? Which one's stronger? Who would win? And they usually say, well, they would never disagree. And then they'll point out, well, this one said, take this cup from me, but the other one wanted him to be sacrificed. So there was disagreements. So people making fun of that, I wonder if they ever look at this and say, well, here in this story, we have one attribute saying mercy, saying, I want to save them, but it can't. It's incapable. Because the other attribute is saying they don't deserve it yet. You can't save people who don't deserve it. So only then, when the story continues, the Midrash teaches that the moment that the people showed faith and acted, the sea opened. So here, it's specifically one person is named. When I heard this Midrash, it was one guy goes into the sea up to his mouth and he's about to drown. And even then, he had so much faith that he walked in to show that I'm willing to die because I believe in God. He said he would take us from the Exodus. He won't let us die. So even when he's ready to die and commit suicide, still the attribute of mercy wouldn't open the sea because it's just one individual. Are you going to save the whole people on the account of one? Only when after he's willing to die, the other people took action and moved forward. Only then would the attribute of justice say, okay, this is a worthy people. Now I will allow the attribute of mercy to open the sea and save the people. So you see how much we've deviated from the text in the Torah here. So did that literally happen? The fact that it names somebody specifically rather than just one random person in the group kind of gives it some credibility. But again, this is where you're going to decide whether you take it literally or if it's just to tell a story. But I wanted to point this out because, people that are out there unfairly attacking other religions. What's that saying? If you live in glass houses, you shouldn't throw stones. You should at least be aware there's ammo that can be used against us if you're out there doing that to them. So the Midrash actually names somebody in this story, Nachsin, a leader of the tribe of Judah, stepped forward and waded into the water, even as it reached his neck, only when the people demonstrated his faith by continuing to walk into the sea, showing his trust in God's promise did the waters part. This act of faith was pivotal. The Midrash explains that once one person demonstrated true trust in God, the rest of the Israelites followed suit, and all together they were able to cross the sea. The miracle, therefore, was the result of both the attribute of mercy and the attribute of justice working together. Mercy opened the sea, but only after justice was satisfied by the Israelites' faith and action. The Midrash emphasizes the importance of human initiative and faith in divine intervention, highlighting the idea that miracles can happen, but they require a leap of faith. A nice idea, but the Torah literally gives a different version. He asks Moses, what are you doing? Why aren't you opening the sea? Put your staff out there. So this is just where people need to be able to deviate when the rabbi is giving you the Torah parsha, and then he deviates into Midrashim. You need to just be able to see where he's leaving the Torah and entering Midrashim mode, and then decide what you accept and what you don't. Okay, as we stated earlier, there's a level of subjectivity to many of these Midrashim, like the one stated above. There are those who view these specific Midrashim in a very positive and meaningful way, and there are others who view it as very problematic for different reasons. This means you as an individual are free to read them and decide how you feel about them, since there is no definitive consensus on which ones we must accept and which ones would be better to not consider as being a historically accurate detail of events. Now, I say you are free to read them because you are. I'm going to go into right here. You see this Rabbi Moshe Perry. In this example that I'm about to show you, he says you are not free to. You are not allowed to decide what makes sense to you and what does not. You have to go with the midrash that your rabbi teaches, the Mizorah that he got from his father and his rabbi. That's what you have to believe. You're not allowed to choose which ones you accept and which ones you don't. He is deviating from what the law says, what you do and don't do, and expanding the jurisdiction of the law to say you're not allowed to believe this. You have to believe this. And you have to be told what you believe. You're not allowed to disagree. And you're not allowed to believe something differently. I find that very problematic. This is not the main reason, but one reason why I chose to include that here. So I will, however, demonstrate an example of how two rabbis, this is Asher Meza and Moshe Perry, how they can disagree on Midrashim, and how I personally view that situation to demonstrate just how easily problematic things can be slipped in and presented as if it was part of Torah and accepted by the entire Jewish people. This is the reason why I went into this example here that we're going to talk about. It's problematic that people don't know how to tell the difference between Midrashim and what the Torah actually says. And they pass it off as if there's no debate. This is completely accepted. So the solution, of course, is to be aware of this problem so that you can recognize it when it's happening and be able to identify when the speaker is deviating from the actual text in the Torah and switching into Midrashim. So Rabbi Asher Meza is famous for having debates with other rabbis. There were two occasions where he had debates with Rabbi Moshe Perry. Chronologically, the second one is about an hour and 40 minutes long, which I highly recommend watching the entire thing. During the 54th minute in the video, which can be found, I put this here because Salah brought up a good point. If this is online, these can be links where you can just click on it. But for a printed version, you just read this to know how to find it on the internet. It can be found on the Torah Judaism International YouTube channel under the playlist tab for debates, or on Asher's website, torahjudaism.com, or it can be found at bejewish.org. Rabbi Moshe Perry, in a discussion about the Erev Rav, the mixed multitudes, Egyptians, Nubians, Midianites, and others, he says, and this is exactly what Moshe says here. The Torah says, and I quote Hashem, go down, your people, meaning the ones that you took out of Mitzrayim, Egypt, that I told you not to take out. They caused this. You see how this one sentence, it says, the Torah says, and I quote Hashem, the ones that I told you not to take out. Meaning Moses sinned, God told Moses not to take these people out, and he did it anyway. He's claiming that the Torah says this, and he's quoting God himself. Fortunately, we didn't fall for it. So he's making the claim that Moses sinned and went against God and brought out the non-Hebrews out of Egypt against God's will. And those were the people that engaged in the sin of building the golden calf. But if you read Deuteronomy chapter 32, you will clearly see Aaron's role in this. You will also see that the only thing being quoted from Torah here are the words go down and your people. That's it. Everything else that he says there is his own opinion there. What would you get out of if I said go down and your people? You get nothing out of these four words. You have to go to everything that he said, which is found nowhere in the text, to build that narrative that he is building. So everything that is after those four words is all midrashim, folklore and legend. But did you see how easy it was to slip that into one sentence and make it sound like this was included in the Torah text itself? Of course, contextually, you should read the entire chapter 32, not just the specific line where that's mentioned. But you should read the entire chapter 32, where you will see that at no point does it make any type of claim that the people who were involved in that were the Erev Rav and not the Hebrews. In fact, according to the JPS, the Jewish Publication Society, Moses actually tells God, let not your anger blaze forth against your people. This is Moses saying, your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say that it was with evil intent that he delivered them only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, how you swore to them by yourself. You said to them, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give your offsprings the whole land of which I spoke to possess. We see later in the same chapter 32 where Moses instructs the Levites to kill brother, neighbor, and kin, not a separate unrelated group that he was not supposed to bring out. Also in the same chapter, Moses defends them as one people, where he says, if you will forgive their sin, well and good. But if not, erase me from the record which you have written. He defends them all as one people, including himself. In the very next chapter, 33, we see God says, set out from here, you and the people you have brought up from the land of Egypt. So he's talking about the people, which includes Hebrews, that were brought out of Egypt. And when we get to verse 5, we read, the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelite people, you are a stiff-necked people. So once again, the entire group is referred to as the Israelite people, not two separate groups. The Erev Rav that he wasn't supposed to bring out, and the Hebrews that he was supposed to bring out, that Moshe claims. It's an hour and 40-minute video. There's a lot of problematic stuff in that video. I only took the Midrash that he brings up here because that's our topic for this chapter. But I encourage everybody to watch that whole video there. Also, I was telling, I think Ash, that I was writing Midrash for a drosh for each parsha in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. And she said, when do we get to read this drosh? I said, when we get to Devarim, then. But this is one of them that I wrote. So this is if you're curious to the other ones that I wrote, this is your sneak preview. This is one of them. Okay.
Insider scoop.
Exactly. So in Jewish tradition, there's a midrash that presents a difficult interpretation of the famous encounter between Esau and Jacob, found in the Torah, Genesis 33:4. So we talked about this the other day. So in this parsha, if you go to Chabad, there's like 7 or 8 different midrashim on this, and they're all good, but there's one that's very problematic, and that's this one, and that's why I want to bring this up in here, because it makes you wonder. You've got 8 different ones that you could talk about on this topic. Why would you choose this one? And I think it's for nefarious reasons. So that's why I wanted to include it, because to at least make you wonder, of all the things you could have talked about, why does this one resonate with you? So in the Torah, Esau approaches Jacob and kisses him after their long separation. The verse states, and Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. However, the Midrash, sources found like the Talmud Bavli, Tractate Berachot 58b, and Midrash Rabbah, offers an alternative view, different from what we find in the actual Torah itself. It claims that Esau's kiss was an attempted bite. He sought to bite Jacob's neck in anger and vengeance. According to the Midrash, God performed a miracle and turned Jacob's neck into solid marble, preventing Esau from biting him. The pain Esau felt when he attempted to bite what felt like stone and broke his teeth is said to be the reason that he wept. This goes against the narrative in the Torah. It even points out there that Rashi does not use this, or Rashi points out that it goes against the narrative. So Rashi, being the famous one that everyone goes to, he's in every Chumash. Even Rashi doesn't embrace this. So why do we have it? Because there are ulterior motives for some of these, and this is one of them. This is why it's here. But it's not the majority of them. So I'm not demonizing Midrashim, but it's just foolish to think that they don't exist, and that we should blindly follow this because somebody chooses to embrace this one over the Peshat. the plain reading of what the Torah says, and all the Midrashim that fill in the gaps that maintain the narrative. This interpretation directly contradicts the simple reading of the Torah narrative. That's the Peshat. In the Torah, the kiss is portrayed as a genuine emotional expression of reconciliation between the brothers, with no mention of anger or violence. Midrash, by contrast, suggests that Esau's actions were malicious, and his weeping was not from joy or reconciliation, but from the pain of his failed attempt to harm Jacob. This story highlights the diverse ways in which Jewish tradition seeks to explain and interpret actions and emotions of biblical characters, offering a deeper or alternative understanding of the text. Now that you are aware that there are contradictory midrashim, choose which ones you will embrace wisely. According to Moshe Perry, you're not allowed to decide which ones you embrace. You have to follow the Mazorah that was given to you by the rabbis because they sat in the Beit Midrash and decided what makes sense to them. And that's what you have to not separate yourself from the people by following what they say. You don't get to be an individual and decide what makes sense to you. If your tradition goes against what the Torah says, then your commitment is to that tradition. And that's what you have to teach people. That's what you have to teach your children. I fundamentally disagree. And so that's why I included that in here. Now, I suspect if Asher read this, he would say, let's not put that in there. But he hasn't told me that he approves or disapproves of the other things that I've sent him. So I'm going to take that silence as that he trusts me to put what I think should be in here. So that's my plan, is to put this in here. Okay, does anybody know how to get back to the main screen on Microsoft Word, like a back button without closing it and reopening it? Does anyone know how that works? Otherwise, I have to close the whole thing and then reopen it, and it seems like there's got to be a better way. But I don't know how to do it. Okay, so that's what I've got for you. That's my plan to put in the chapters on Midrashim. Any other questions or comments before we stop the recording and continue? All right, I'll take that silence as agreement. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And anybody not in the live class watching the recording, we will see you next week.